Thanks for downloading the Tech Tent podcast from the BBC World Service. To find out more about us and to access all our past episodes, visit our webpage at bbcworldservice.com/techtent. Hello and welcome to Tech Tent, your essential weekly guide to all the hottest news and trends from the technology business. I'm Rory Catlin-Jones, and this week, the Saudi Arabian app that allows men to stop women from travelling abroad, and why human rights campaigners want Apple and Google to ban it. We find out whether electric vehicles have reached a tipping point where they become realistic options for many motorists. And we hear about surveillance capitalism, the idea that today's tech giants pose a unique threat to democracy. I'm joined this week by BBC technology reporter Jane Wakefield. Hi, Jane.
Hello, Rory.
And my special guest is Stephanie Hare, a technology commentator with a special interest in data and surveillance. Welcome, Stephanie.
Hi, Rory.
You'll be talking about all our big issues this week. Here's a flavour of what's coming up.
Businesses are starting to see that kind of service, that they'll attract people, they'll come along and charge their vehicles, while they eat their meatballs and do their shopping.
It begins with taking our private human experience. It ends up with producing prediction products that it sells into a new kind of marketplace. That is the essence of surveillance capitalism.
Now, first this week, the row over the way technology can be used to limit freedom. In Saudi Arabia, women need permission from a male guardian, usually a father or a husband, to travel abroad. A smartphone app called Absha, available for both Apple and Android phones, allows men to approve journeys or refuse permission to travel. Here's Salwa, a young woman who fled Saudi Arabia last year. She told my World Service colleague Nuala McGovern how she got around the system to make her escape.
I steal my father's phone when he was sleeping. I just entered to his account in Interior Minister, and I have a picture of my father national ID. So I just put that. I forget the passport, and I receive a code in my father phone, and it changed the number of my father phone to my phone number, and I make a consent for me and for my sister.
So let me get this straight. You're basically impersonating your father because you had his phone and you were able to give consent for you to travel?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's one woman who did manage to leave Saudi Arabia. There's now pressure on Apple and Google to remove this app. Rothna Begum is senior women's rights researcher at the campaign group Human Rights Watch. She explained to me how the system limited the rights of every Saudi woman.
She can't leave an airport without permission being provided. When she gets to the airport and she hands over her boarding pass, and when she wants to get to the gate, the authorities will know whether or not she has been granted permission. If her guardian has asked for notifications, and so for instance, when she's left the airport, he will receive an SMS text alert informing him that she's left the airport in itself.
So what do you think is the responsibility of tech companies when it comes to this app, which is available on both Apple's iPhone and on Android phones owned by Google?
So App Store providers should be ensuring that apps are not facilitating abuse and discrimination. And in this regard, a part of that app has a function that is directly designed to discriminate against women. It's actually facilitating abuse. And so what these providers should be doing is providing extra scrutiny when it comes to government services apps and ensuring that they're not facilitating human rights abuses. In the case of Google, they actually don't pre-screen apps, but they can review apps if they have been flagged as inappropriate, so they can review them in line with their own policies. Apple does pre-screen apps for security purposes, but they also have both Google and Apple have rules around not having apps that, can provide for threats, harassment, and other forms of abuse. So they do both have these rules. But in terms of how they're reviewing and approving apps is very different in practice. And if you think about it, the app itself is not on its face it doesn't look like it's abusive, but it does have an abusive function. And now that they've been alerted to it, they could go back to the Saudi government and tell them to remove that functionality that is allowing men to control and track women's movement.
Have you got any hope, expectation that they'll actually do that?
I think now that it's been flagged to them, I think there is some interest. I don't think it was something that they may have been even aware of, but now that they are aware of it, I think it could be something that they might review. I think the broader issue is even if it's taken off, the fact is that the Saudi authorities provide for this through a government portal website anyway, and they're not going to remove this entire thing. So what we really need is for companies like Apple and Google not only to insist on this specific function, but also to push the authorities to get rid of this system entirely. And for other governments who are also interested in what Apple and Google are doing, should also be going to the Saudi authorities and calling on them to abolish the male guardianship system entirely.
Rothna Begum from Human Rights Watch. Apple says it is looking into this app. The BBC's contacted Google, but we've yet to receive any reply from that company. Jane Wakefield, you've been writing about this week. Why has this emerged as an issue right now, do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting because this app's been around for a few years and it's actually garnered about 1 million downloads. But there was a specific investigation from a website called Insider, which kind of pointed out that it could be used in this way. It's worth saying, though, that, this is really just putting into place the rules of the country that, it was made for. So it's long been the fact that women have to have this male guardian and go through a sort of rigmarole of paperwork if they want to leave the country. This just makes the process much easier. And as we've seen, it can also be used by the women themselves to sort of take over the app and get out if that's what they want to do.
But the technology is designed to keep them in check, as it were. Yeah,
Google and Facebook would argue that Google and Apple would argue that Facebook's neutral, isn't it? But that obviously the functionality that the government wants is the stuff that starts making it abusive. And it's worth saying as well that Tim Cook clearly didn't know about this until he was asked in an interview, and that's why now they are looking into this.
Stephanie Hare, you take a lot of interest in surveillance, things like facial recognition and so on. What's your view on the responsibility of the tech companies here?
I think they have to ask themselves what it is that they want to be complicit in and how they want to be associated as a brand. So on the one hand, they could argue that this practice of guardianship and restricting women's rights is legal in Saudi Arabia, and that therefore they're not doing anything wrong by allowing an app to be hosted on their site that allows something that's legal within Saudi Arabia. That said, these are global companies who take position on values, and Tim Cook in particular with Apple really has, but also Google does as well with its attitude towards, it used to be do no evil, now it's do the right thing.
But every country they operate in, they make these compromises. You think of what they do to try and get into China.
Well, I mean, that's not definitive what they're doing to get into China or not. So I guess it's really just going to be about them deciding, is this something they want to support, or can they use their power? These are two of the most powerful companies in the world, right? They're rich enough. They can take the hit if there's a profit hit of kicking Saudi Arabia off that platform, or of forcing a functionality change and saying you can have the app if you remove that functionality. That won't solve the problem within Saudi Arabia, but it will send a really clear signal that those two companies won't support the restriction of women.
Well, we'll see what happens. We'll report back next week to see if there's been a move there. Let's have a look at some of the week's other big tech stories with